Hi, I'm Danielle and welcome to Redhead Green World. Today we're here with my really good friend Jenny Trickey. She is a whale acoustician at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla. And in case you don't know what that is, Jenny's going to explain what the heck she does.
So I'm an acoustic ecologist at Scripps, and basically that means that I use sound to study marine animals. And sound is a very important sense for animals in the ocean. Oftentimes when you think if you're out in the deep ocean, it's pretty murky, you may not be able to see very well, so sound is very important. So what my lab does is use the sounds that these animals make to help monitor them and see where they are, who's there, what times of the year they're there, and any kind of patterns that might go with that, seasonal or day versus night.
Yeah. All right, so you're listening to the whales so we can learn more about them. Now, it seems like through your time working with the whales, you've kind of, you kind of have a favorite now that you like a little bit more. And which whale is that? What's the whale you kind of like a lot?
So the animals that I spend most of my time working on are beaked whales, which a lot of people may have no idea what a beaked whale is. I didn't know too much about them until I came to Scripps.
And just because there's two kinds of whales, there's baleen whales, which are the ones with the big filters and they filter feed and
like a blue whale or
a humpback or something. And then you have a beaked whale. So what is a beaked whale?
A beaked whale is called an Odonocete, which just means a toothed whale.
Which is like a dolphin.
Yeah, a dolphin.
Dolphin counts.
And the unique thing about Odonocetes, these toothed whales, they can echolocate. So unlike a baleen whale, they actually can click, and they emit these clicks, and then they receive the echoes back, and that allows them to see their environment with sound. So that's something that only toothed whales, like a beaked whale, can do.
Or
something like
a
humpback whale or a blue whale, they can't do that.
Well, that's super cool.
Yeah.
And there's one kind of whale that you've been studying a lot lately, and that's the Cuviers beaked whale. What is a Cuvier? Because really, until you started working with him, I don't think I'd ever heard of a Cuvier's beaked whale. So tell me something about them in particular.
Okay. So Cuvier's beaked whales are actually thought to be probably the most abundant species of beaked whale.
Good news, okay.
You find them all over the planet, all the oceans and the Mediterranean. So they have a very widespread distribution. And so you think like, oh, they're everywhere. You must know a lot about them. Not so much.
And why not? Like, why don't we know that much about them?
So the typical beaked whale is not something like a dolphin would behave.
Okay.
People think of dolphins, you go out on a boat and you have these dolphins come in to bow ride, and you can find them right off the coast. You look out from the beach, you see dolphins out there. A beaked whale is nothing like that.
Okay.
So these guys, they're very deep divers, and a fun fact about them is that they actually hold the record for the deepest and longest dive by a marine mammal. So they're extreme divers.
So how deep and how long, like what's their time?
So the record dive was done by a Cuvier's beaked whale, actually right out in our backyard in the Channel Islands.
Oh, cool.
And that whale dove, I think, almost to 3,000 meters, so about 10,000 feet deep, and it stayed down for over 2 hours.
That's pretty incredible.
Pretty extreme.
Yeah.
And so they may not dive, that long and that deep every time, but from the data that we do have on these animals, and a lot of it comes from tags, so a tag that actually you attach to the animal, and then it can monitor how it's diving and its behavior. From tag records, it seems like a very typical day for a beaked whale is diving, 1,000 meters down,
so like
staying down for over an hour, and they do that multiple times a day. That's just normal.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah. So because they're spending a lot of time in deep water, we don't often really get to see them or find out or observe them because they're spending so much time in really deep water.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you think about their ecology, they're living in these really offshore habitats. They're diving really deep, and the reason they dive so deep is because they feed on deep sea squid.
Okay. So that's where all the food's hanging out.
All the
super
food is
deep,
very,
so they need to go
very
down there
far
to get
down.
it. Okay.
So they're one of the few animals in the ocean that can actually, or marine mammals in the ocean that can access that prey, because a typical dolphin is not diving 1,000 meters down. They just physically can't
do it.
So given that they live pretty offshore, they don't spend much time at the surface. They spend most of their time down at depth foraging. So when you think about it, you're not going to come across these guys. If you go out in the ocean on a boat, it's not likely you're going to come across a beaked whale, just because
Yeah.
They don't spend much time up at the surface, and they're also pretty skittish. They don't come up to boats like a dolphin would.
So I know we don't know too much about them, but do we have any idea of what kind of threats they're facing in the wild, or what's happening to their habitat? Like, what is the status of Cuvier's beaked whales right now, as far as we know?
So again, as I said, they're thought to be probably the most abundant species of beaked whale. However, like I said, we don't really see them very often, so it's very hard to study them. And the limited data we do have comes from very, very small sample sizes, so maybe only a few animals get seen, in each of these studies that happen. And they're usually concentrated in, very localized areas. So even though you find them everywhere, there might only be a few study sites in the world where people are actually able to go out and, with any luck, come across them, often enough to get data off of them.
Yeah, do we have any idea of what could be affecting them in the wild, or just in general, what's going on with them?
So globally, it seems like they're doing okay. Like they don't seem to be in danger of going extinct. There's probably enough of them out there that that's not a concern. But again, there's still little we know about their ecology. We know nothing about local abundance, distribution, ecology, natural behaviors, population structure. We have no fine-scale data on these animals. But the one thing that does seem to hold true, and this isn't just for Cuviers, it's, as far as we can tell, it's probably something that most beaked whales are susceptible to, and that's man-made sound. So things like naval sonar have come up in the news a lot. You probably have seen in the news at some point that occasionally after the Navy uses sonar, you get these mass strandings of animals, and often that's a beaked whale. That's a beaked whale species that tends to be affected.
And what do you think is happening? Is probably damaging their ears so that
we're not exactly
really
sure.
know.
That's been a focus of a lot of research. Because obviously we want to get to the bottom of that and figure out why they, of all animals, tend to be so vulnerable to that kind of noise. But yeah, so things like man-made sonar, and the other big thing that's coming up now is seismic exploration. So people want to go out and find oil.
So it's basically offshore oil drilling. So when they go to put those rigs in, or even look for the oil, it's super noisy. So these are big problems right now.
There's a whole scale that you could go off of. Maybe, in the worst case scenario, it could kill an animal. You get these mass strandings and the animals die. But you also can scale that back and think, well, maybe it's not physically harming them or killing them, but it could still be very disruptive.
So it could be changing their behavior,
their feeding.
If
you're, sitting in your backyard having a picnic, and all of a sudden someone throws a bunch of firecrackers in, you're probably not going to sit there. You're probably going to go away. So when you think about an animal in the ocean, if this really noisy sound source comes in and you're trying to feed or do whatever it is you need to do, your natural behavior is probably going to change. And that could be anything from, just stopping what you're doing that instant to totally leaving that area.
For good,
so we're not really sure exactly
what's going on.
Exactly what's happening and what time scale that's going to occur on.
So why, in general, why should I care about, here's an animal that I'm probably never going to see, and I go out and look for marine mammals, I'm all about marine mammals, but this is still an animal that I'm probably never going to see, let alone the average person out there is probably never going to come across this animal in their whole entire life. So why should we care at all about what's happening, or potentially happening, or could be happening to beaked whales? And to Cuviers or any other.
Well, again, I think one potential answer to that question goes back to their unique ecology. These are one of the few marine mammals that can dive as deep as they do, and that predate, in the mesopelagic. And the mesopelagic is sort of like the deep sea. So it's anything from like 200 meters down to 1,000 meters below the sea surface. So when you think about it, there's only a few animals out there in the ocean, like large predators like a beaked whale or a sperm whale, that can dive that deep. So they probably are, it's safe to say, apex predators of that ecosystem, of that deep sea. So if you start taking them out of that ecosystem, and the mesopelagic is actually the largest ecosystem on Earth.
So the super deep sea, that's our biggest ecosystem on Earth. And that's
again,
kind of
it's
shocking.
not very explored, so we don't really know how things are changing. And how things are going to continue to change, but it's very likely that environment is changing pretty rapidly due to climate change and overfishing and all these other threats that are happening. So when you take, the apex predator out of that ecosystem, we don't really know how that's going to change the dynamics in it, but it's probably not going to be good.
Probably not. Probably not. So, in general, then, let's say I'm like, oh, awesome! I want to learn more about Cuviers. Now I care about them. I want them to stay in the ocean. I want them to be these apex predators that are, positively affecting their ecosystem down there. What can I do about it? Because I think a lot of times we might know about problems or issues going on, but we don't know what we can do about it, and it can feel a little bit helpless. So if someone's interested in the beaked whales, learning more about them, or helping, how can we help? What can we do?
Well, I think the main thing we need to do, and it's pretty basic, is just to collect more baseline data on them.
Okay.
Because we're trying to answer all these big questions of how is this going to change, or what's going to happen if that happens.
Yeah.
The thing is, we don't even have a baseline for what's normal with these
things
species.
like lifespan, or just
or
really
again, the threats they face.
Right.
We're trying to figure out, why are they so affected? What can we do to mitigate that so that it doesn't continue to keep happening? But until we know what's normal, we can't really say how and why they're being affected as they are.
Now,
so baseline data would just
would be super great.
Basic research to learn more about the basic ecology and natural behaviors of these animals.
And so that's kind of what you're doing, right? That's a project you've been working on. Now, you've been going out to an area called Guadalupe Island, or you went once last year and you're going again this year. And that's an island off of Baja, California, off of Mexico. Now, how far offshore is that?
I think it's about 150 miles off Ensenada.
So it's way out there.
It's pretty remote,
Pretty remote.
Not many people go out there.
No, and there's actually a unique thing that happens there with these Cuviers beaked whales. So can you talk a little bit about why this area is so special for the beaked whales or for the Cuviers, and what you're doing out there?
So Guadalupe Island is considered a biosphere reserve, so it's a protected area in Mexico. Some people might know of it because it's a great white hotspot. So it's one of
a lot of cage diving trips.
The best places
out
on
there,
the planet to go see great whites. And the white sharks are not there year round. They only come during the summer, fall, and they're coming to feed on the seals and sea lions that live on the islands. And so people, think of it as this awesome place to go see sharks and maybe to go see Guadalupe fur seals and elephant seals. But it turns out it's actually quite the hot spot for Cuvier's beaked whales as well. And so we're not really sure what about it makes it so attractive to them, but it's obviously a productive environment if you see them in such high numbers as we do. And our other theory is that it could possibly be their breeding grounds.
Okay.
And that's based on sightings in the past that have seen a lot of mom-calf pairs. And again, we don't really know much about Cuvier's beaked whales. We have a population here in Southern California, but we don't know, the seasonality of when they have their calves, or where they do it.
But
it's possible that these animals living here in California are seasonally migrating down to Guadalupe, and that's their breeding grounds. So it could be a very important critical habitat.
Right. And the other thing that's so unique about that area is that, you talked about how deep divers they are, but they're actually spending a lot of time at the surface at Guadalupe Island, right? I mean, or not a lot, but they're coming to the surface and you can actually see them at the surface more than you would maybe in some other spots. Is that true? Or
well, they do seem to be sticking in one area, whereas in the open ocean they might be, much more variable. They're moving around. In Guadalupe, there's a big bay in the northeast of the island, and it's called Bahia Norte. And in the 2 or 3 weeks that we spent out there last fall, we did navigations all around the island. We spent time, on both sides, and all of the sightings we had were in this one bay.
So it's one spot.
So it
very
seems to be like
okay.
very concentrated. Lots of animals in a relatively small space, and so it's not so much that individual animals are spending lots of time at the surface, but you just have all these groups, and they tend to be sticking around.
Okay.
And so there might be some kind of spatial movement. They might be moving, maybe offshore at night, or who knows.
Okay.
But for the most part, the encounter rate within the bay is very high.
And what you're trying to do down there now to find out the answer, or to start to find out the answers to these questions, is you're trying to tag them. Right? I mean, that's the goal of going down there, right? Is trying, just observing, but also trying to put tags on them so that you can track their movements, get data on their depth, how deep they're diving, and what they're doing, where they're going, and that sort of thing, right?
Yep. So we have a number of goals when we go down there to do our field work. One of them is just basic visual observations,
Right.
like
Just
where they are,
look at them, see where they're at. What are they
group
doing?
size,
Yeah.
you know, behaviors, and we're also collecting photo ID pictures.
Oh, right. So you try to put like
So-
a catalog
so
together
we
so they
have a
can
catalog,
identify individual
yep.
animals, which a lot of people do. You might know about it with humpback whales. That's a popular thing, or dolphins, any kind of thing. They look for specific markings either on their body or on their flukes or their dorsal
Scars
fins.
and shape
Yeah,
of the fin.
so they can say, oh, that's that animal, and they can track them over the years.
Yeah. So photo ID is important not just within Guadalupe, because you can compare pictures over time, and you can look at things like social, you know, associations. Maybe an animal's alone one day, and then he's in a group of 5 the next day, and so you can look at group behavior with that. And over time, you can start to put, you know, sense of our animals sticking around year after year. Like some of our animals in the catalog we've rematched from 2009.
Oh,
so
wow.
It's
So
obvious
you know
it's
they're
not
coming
like
back,
they just
like-
come once and that's it.
Yeah.
Like, this seems to be an important area for them,
Okay.
whether they're staying there year round or maybe coming up here to Southern California and just migrating back and forth.
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah.
So that's the other idea with the photo ID catalog is we'll be comparing the Guadalupe catalog with the Southern California catalog,
to see if
so
they're
we
the
get an
same-
idea of
same
regional
animals. Okay.
movements
Okay.
and site fidelity. Do they stick to one area? Do they move around a lot? Like, how connected are the populations?
Okay.
There might be a decent level of exchange.
Yeah. But, who
but-
knows?
Who knows? Yeah.
So one problem that it seems like you and a lot of scientists are running into right now is funding and lack of funding to find out the answers to these questions. We all know the ocean, basically, if things are wrong with the ocean, you know, things are wrong with the whole planet. So it's very important that we protect our ocean, understand what's going on in the ocean, because I mean, it's the largest ecosystem on Earth, you know, like, so the oceans are important for lots and lots of reasons, and the more we know about the creatures that live in them, the more they can tell us about the health of the ocean, therefore the health of the planet. So you actually have a fundraising campaign that's going on. There's a site called experiment.com, which is basically like GoFundMe, but for science. So this is super cool. So Jenny and some of her colleagues down in Mexico are fundraising right now to go back to Guadalupe in the next couple months, right?
Next month.
Next month.
Right, yeah.
So in the next, your campaign is still going on. So in the next, we have about a week left
About a week, yeah.
of your campaign. So if you go to the blog, I'll include a link to the website where you can donate to Jenny's scientific research, and you can actually then kind of be a part of it and help fund science and help us learn what's going on with these really cool, interesting animals, these Cuviers beaked whales. So Jenny, thank you so much for teaching us a little bit about Cuvier's beaked whales. And if you head back to the blog, redheadgreenworld.com, you'll see links to, you'll have different pictures. Jenny sent me some really fantastic pictures of Cuviers. We're going to try and get some footage of them so you can see them underwater. And I'll include a link to the website where you can donate to Jenny's fundraising and help fund some research for Cuvier's beaked whale. So head on to the blog and learn more about these really cool creatures.